So this presentation is going to be on motivational interviewing and specifically how to get a client to engage in long-term exercise behaviour, and hopefully by doing so they're going to get the mental and the physical benefits of doing that. Now, what actually is motivational interviewing? Well, it's a client-centered counselling style, and it's a directive means to evoke behaviour change. So what we're actually trying to do there is we're trying to reduce the ambivalence towards exercise and increase their motivation towards exercise. But how do we know what sort of stage of change they're at? How do we know how to classify this stage of change? How do we know what's going to work at that stage of change? Well, for that we've got what's called the trans-theoretical model. Now we can see here that in this model it moves in a cyclic sort of fashion. So for example, a person might start in pre-contemplation, move to contemplation, then preparation, action, maintenance, and perhaps they might have a relapse. And so they might be moving around this and moving through different stages of change. So you can see how motivational interviewing might be really helpful here, because motivational interviewing might allow us to work out, okay, well, this person seems to be in the preparation phase, for example. And it also might help us because we might work out what sort of strategies are likely to work for this person based on such and such stage of change. So it's really helpful to use the two in conjunction with one another. As far as the spirit of motivational interviewing, this is just a way to think about how you should be conducting the interview. So you want to think about the spirit of motivational interviewing versus an authoritative approach. So for example, we want to think collaboration versus confrontation. So in a collaboration, you're working as a team towards achieving the client's goal of actually getting them to exercise. Whereas as a confrontation would be saying, okay, you're doing this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and not actually working towards a goal, the two of you together. We want to think of this as evocation versus education. So in other words, we want to evoke what the client's motivations are to change. We don't want to just be educating them going, okay, this is what needs to be changed, this is what needs to be changed, and this is why. We want to hear what their reasons are for changing. We want to think about this as honouring client autonomy versus authority. So in other words, we want the client to be the one to choose to change here. We don't want to be the authority figure saying that you have to change. We want it to come from them more. So as far as a broad application of motivational interviewing, we can think about this as two separate phases. So the first phase, we're going to build their motivation to change. Now a good acronym here is the OARS acronym, which stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections and summarising. And we'll go through an example to make that a little bit clearer in the next slide. Number two is strengthening their commitment to change. So we're going to do that. We're going to start off with some change talk. So we're going to have some advantages, perhaps of engaging in exercise, perhaps the disadvantages of continuing with a status quo, in other words, their sedentary behaviour at the moment. We might look at optimism to change, so how they actually might achieve this exercise goal and what they would have to do, and their intention. So what are they actually intending to get out of potentially engaging in this exercise behaviour? Now you can see how that works really well with goal setting. So if we've done a good change talk, we'll be able to work with them and get a pretty good idea of what their goals are going to be, and then we can sort of just help them make these realistic as they go through them. From there, obviously, we can work on an action plan. So okay, we've worked out that they most likely want to achieve such and such a goal. Then we go through the action plan with them. How are you actually going to get this goal achieved? Break it down to smaller subcomponents, and then we can build from there. So let's look at a practical example now. So this is just an example that I've made up. We've got an overweight client who's got diabetes and they haven't participated in exercise for 5 years. So first off, well, we've got to build their motivation for change. So we might ask some open-ended questions. For example, could you describe some of the concerns you have about exercising with diabetes? So that'll get them to give us some more information that if we'd asked a closed-ended question, we wouldn't have got as much, and we wouldn't have as much to work with, and then from there, less information. We're not going to be able to help them in the same way that we would with an open-ended question. As far as affirmations, we might go, okay, well, they might explain a whole bunch to us, and we'll go, okay, well, thank you for explaining that. I've got a better idea of how you're controlling your blood sugar and what you're actually going through dealing with this problem. As far as a reflection, perhaps they've expressed a bunch of concerns about exercising with diabetes and they're scared of certain consequences. You can just reflect on what they've actually done to overcome this and how they're getting through it at the moment anyway. From there, we want to just summarise. So at the end, you're trying to work out exactly what they sort of want, and you can do that by just going, okay, so you've told me, for example, you would actually like to exercise, it's just that you want to know how to do it perhaps safely with your diabetes. And really what you most want is just to lose the weight. Perhaps you also want to play with your kids, but it's just an idea so you can get a bit of feedback from the client to make sure you're on the same page with them and you've understood what they've told you. So now that we've done that, we move on to part number 2, which is strengthening their commitment to change. So we use this change talk. So for example, one of the disadvantages, we might go, okay, well, what's actually worrying you at the moment about your diabetes? What specifically is it? And my answer, well, I'm worried about hyperglycemic attacks. That's really what it is. We might have an advantage. So, well, what would you get if you actually lost this weight that you said that you wanted to lose? Like, well, I'll feel more confident. It'll reduce my anxiety or something along those lines. As far as optimism for change, we might get them to ask, well, what did you do when you mentioned you'd exercised previously? What were you doing then? And they go, oh, I was in a walking club or a rowing club or a cycling club or something along those lines. Intention. So, well, how do you want your life to change by exercising in the next few years? And they go, well, the main thing is perhaps I want to lose weight, I want to play with my kids, I want to be enjoying my exercise, whatever it might be for that person. So they're getting more information there. Okay, if you've done that well, we'll have a pretty good idea. What sort of goals might this client want? Well, perhaps we talk through it and we go, okay, well, they want to lose some weight, so a realistic goal might be to lose 5 kilos within the next 3 months. Perhaps they want to walk their kids to school every day, so that's a realistic thing and an easy way for them to get some exercise in. Perhaps they want to cycle 2 times a week for 30 minutes. Okay, so we've got these goals. Now how are they actually going to go about and do it? Well, we need an action plan. So based on what they've said, we might suggest, all right, well, do you know of any clubs that you want to join? They go, oh, okay, well actually, there's this cycling club that I've been meaning to get into. This would be a good reason to. And then all of a sudden, they're in the club, they're cycling the 2 times a week, they're achieving their goal, and it's based on the information they've given us before. It might be to arrange a meeting with a dietitian so they can go, okay, I'm just concerned about, I don't know how much carbohydrate I should be consuming before exercise, so they can work out exactly what they need to be doing there. Perhaps it's something simple in the environment. Place your exercise gear out the night before so there's no friction in the morning. You can wake up, exercise right away, so something simple like that. So how are they actually going to go about making this change? So overall, we've got 4 guiding principles throughout the interview. Now, they've come up with these because you're not always going to have a huge amount of time with every single client. Sometimes you're going to be in a bit of a rush and you need to obviously still do a good job. So how are you going to do that? Well, you can use this acronym. So rule, resist the writing reflex. You don't want to be sitting there and every time they mention something that's a bit off track, you interrupt and go, okay, no, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. You want to hold back and let them talk you through their issues and let them talk you through why they actually want to change. So you don't want to jump in and interrupt this process and get them to sort of be a you versus them approach. You want to understand the client's motivation. So specifically in this case, why do you actually want to exercise? What are your reasons for doing so? You want to listen with empathy. So understand what sort of problems and barriers the client might be facing and just do your best to understand what they might be going through and help them through that process. You want to empower the client to make their own choices. So again, this is where that spirit of motivational interviewing comes in. It's you guys together. You're working as a team, hoping that to push them towards the goals that they really would like to achieve. So it's both of you working together with this one. Now, should you have more time, there's 4 more principles which you can bring into your motivational interview. So you want to express empathy. So we mentioned listening. Now we're expressing, okay, well, I understand that you were going through such and such a barrier. Actually expressing what, and trying to understand what they've gone through as best you can. Develop discrepancy. So in other words, what are they doing now? What do they need to be doing to get to the goal? The discrepancy between those 2 things. Make that really clear. Roll with the resistance. So when you're going through the motivational interview, you don't want to be thinking, okay, well, you need to change this and this and this and this. You want to go, okay, well, you can just start off with this small change, suggest a little thing here, base it on what they've said, make it so that you're not pushing them too fast, too quickly. And finally, support their self-efficacy. So in other words, support their ability to make this change and make it clear that you believe in them and they've got the ability. And finally, normalize a relapse. A relapse happens with everyone. Just make it clear that this might happen to them and it's a normal part of the process and you can get back in the wagon at the end of that. Thank you.